Hey Brian, viewers here. This is Stochastic Agency and welcome back. It is August 14th, 2024 for RPG a Day. And our prompt is compelling characters. But I gotta first say, pardon me, but I am tired. It's very, very hot. So without further ado, let's talk about compelling characters. We get to talk a lot about having motivations and goals and desires, and authors will talk about what the spine of a character is. And there's a lot that goes into making a compelling character, or can elevate a character to become compelling. But I'm going to focus on one specific thing that gets brought up a lot. And I'm also going to cite a recent Netflix series that I've been sleeping on for quite some time. I mean, let's face it, after a while, you've pretty much seen everything you want, so your wish list is more like the sleepers list. But more on that in just a minute. To me, compelling characters have one very large thing that is handled while we're playing RPGs that can make them very compelling. And that is their relationships. Relationships are something that does get discussed very often. How do the characters relate to the setting and the world that you're playing in? How do factions relate to each other? How do the characters relate to other characters and NPCs that they encounter? And it is that kind of relationship, this broad umbrella of relationship, that can make it very difficult to focus on. So, for my example, we're going to be using a show, I believe originally aired on Paramount Plus, but it is currently available on Netflix, called School Spirits. Now, I know if you've got Netflix, you may have seen this pop up, and it may be a sleeper for you. But, thankfully, since it came out last year, there is only one season. It is only 8 episodes, so it's pretty easy to kind of get through. On average, the episodes are, of course, about an hour long, roughly. Why am I recommending a show like this? A show about a character named Maddie, who is a teen, who finds herself trapped in a purgatory-like afterlife in high school. Not necessarily the most compelling of premises, right? But sometimes descriptions can be deceiving. Now, I'm not going to go into the show exactly. You can watch the show for yourself. But here's the gist of it. So, Maddie is a 16-year-old girl, and she is newly deceased, and she finds herself trapped in the afterlife, which takes the form of high school, along with some other kids who have died in the past at this high school, along with a former teacher. Throughout the show, she goes on, as we would say normally, hijinks to solve the mystery of her death and who killed her. With me so far, like I said, if you really want to watch the show, and I am going to recommend it, it's 8+ on IMDb and I think Rotten Tomatoes or whatever it is. I personally am not a big reader of film criticism. So why pick this show for relationships? Well, this show is nothing but relationships. It is the strain of having relationships. It is the exacerbation of relationships. It is losing relationships and getting new ones. It is jam-packed in 8 episodes, 8 hours of the ups and downs and the intricacies of the relationships between the living with the living, the dead with the dead, and the dead with the alive. Now, one interesting relationship that is seen also in this show is the relationship of the dead with the world of the living. And if you like reading about ghosts, there's loads of stories about, and movies too, and TV shows. This is nothing new. We've seen lots of ways in which ghosts have a relationship with the living world. But the nice thing about it is you can go into this show without understanding that relationship, but gain a lot of found knowledge, world building in game, if you will, along the way. We, as the living, hopefully most of you are alive, have had a long fascination with the dead, the undead, and death. We've also had a lot of fascination with mysteries, and well, there's a lot of unknowns around death, at least for a lot of people. And in this show, and potentially, towards the very end, there's finally the potential to have the occult involved, which up until then hasn't been part of the relationships. So what's important here? Throughout the show, we get to see the exposure of suspicion and secrets. How do relationships change when you suspect someone only to find out that they are innocent of any wrongdoing? How do you react when you discover a secret about someone you know? Dependencies. So there are a lot of dependencies in this show, and they are put on display in a very straightforward and understandable and relatable, pun intended, way. It's important to understand that there are dependencies in relationships in the game if you want there to be. Dependencies can be a point of tension between groups or individuals. And so accentuating, upplaying, or downplaying the dependencies that characters have with each other, because let's face it, it's not unusual for the standard role-playing game advice to be, don't split the party. So your relationships can be life-depending. Maddie, the girl, must rely on one character, and I'll get to him later. This character is a living character, and she needs this character for help in the real world. For some reason, because of their relationship and the dead's relationship with the school, he is actually able to see and communicate with her. But I'm not going to give away why. You might be able to suspect part of why, though, right? Boy, girl, I mean, come on, let's face it. So while the living still go about their business attempting to deal with the disappearance of Maddie, in the world of the dead have mostly just given up on that. Or at least that's what the teacher in the group is attempting to get them to do so that they can move on. This relationship between the once lived life and now living the dead life becomes an object within the entire show. And it waxes and wanes as we get to bounce between the living relationships and the dead relationships, with only this one single focal point kind of in the middle here. So of all the characters out there on the show, the one whose relationship is probably the most compelling to watch throughout the entire show, at least in this viewer's humble opinion, is that of the Simon Elroy character played by Kristen Ventura. This is the living friend of Maddie, the deceased girl, for whom the story kind of centers around. But it is not just their relationship, but in particular Simon's relationship. Because the reason why I find his character so compelling has to do with one question about his relationship with everything that's going on, and that is, how does your relationship change when you're the only one who knows a truth?